Katie here.
I think it's just us right now.
Yeah, I wasn't too hopeful. I know Toss liked the book, but I don't think she does these kind of meetings.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people, because we are closed, probably a lot of people are also dealing with the storm and stuff like that. But yeah, that's okay. We can talk about the book. And if anybody else joins in, they can join in.
Another thing is next Thursday is Rec Talk.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could make a note for people if they wanted to come and discuss the book a little bit. They could come to that then and do it there.
Yeah. I wonder if we could do like the first half. We could talk about the Children Act, and then the second half, maybe we could do recommendations and stuff like that.
Okay. Because I was just going to come to the meeting and talk about the movie because I like the movie and I don't remember that much about the book. But if you want to talk about the book, it might refresh my memory.
Okay. Yeah. I think the book and the movie were pretty similar. The ending was slightly different, but yeah. So what did you think?
What was the ending of the book?
In the book, Fiona just got the message that Adam had died. She didn't get to see him again before he died. I think in the movie she saw him one last time before he died.
Well, in the movie, he had traveled to visit her at a place where she was performing and working. If I recall right, and she sent him home with a train ticket, and I don't recall her going back to the hospital to visit him. Maybe she did in the book.
Okay. She didn't visit him in the hospital. Yeah, but no, when he came to see her was the last time that she saw him. So I guess that was the same. I guess it followed pretty faithfully then, because I saw the movie several years ago and I just read the book this week. So
okay. So my impression since they were both so similar, my impression of the story is that he rejected all treatment because she had rejected him and he chose to die. And so there was more to it rather than life-saving medicine or treatment. In the first place, it was about his beliefs, which there's no guarantee he would have died without a blood transfusion. It was just their opinion. So to me, it just goes into that there's various aspects and components of a person's well-being and healing and treatment.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that we don't actually know that he would have died without the treatment, because even the doctors were saying, well, he might die, he might survive and be injured. He might go into kidney failure. We just don't know. And it was because of that unknown aspect that they were so insistent on doing the transfusion. But it was not guaranteed that he would have died without it.
Right. No treatment is guaranteed. I mean, even when I go to the dentist, there's a long form that says that it's I don't know if it uses the word experimental, but it's not guaranteed, and yet it usually works. But right, nothing is guaranteed. My opinion of the story, and it's not a true story, it's maybe based on other things, is that going against somebody's beliefs can be harmful, even though her belief was different, but it was his belief that I feel should have been respected.
Yeah, I definitely felt that way too. Because it was his body, it was his life, to live with the consequences, and especially with him being 17 and a half, like almost 18. I could see more of an ethical dilemma with like a young child that you could argue he can't really have the understanding to make an informed choice. But what's really the difference between 17 and a half versus 18? It's more of a legal technicality, but because of that, his whole life changed. And I don't think that either the judge or other people really understood, because they didn't understand his point of view. They didn't understand the profound harm that can come from doing something to someone's body against their will. So yeah, I definitely felt that very profoundly in the story.
And the whole point of him falling in love with her, I'm trying to think of how that could have progressed if he didn't have a blood transfusion but survived. It's hard to know, because there can be a personality change with a blood transfusion. So that's really hard to say. But that was a big component there, is that he fell in love with the judge. Unexpected. That was an unexpected event.
Yeah, and I mean, you say fell in love, and I'm not disagreeing with that assessment, but I felt like he fell in love with her, not like in a romance kind of way, but in like a way where he idealized her. And I think especially after he had lost everything, he had cut ties with his family, with his church. He had basically cut off his old life, and he was kind of looking to her for guidance. And like from his perspective, it was like, well, you took my old life away from me, and now you're just abandoning me to this new life that I didn't want, didn't choose, and you're just abandoning me to it.
Right. It's like that's a good point. So she imposed that on him, and yet he was looking to her as to be in her life, to be his mentor, and yet she was rejecting that. And so, yeah, that was a big letdown for all the power that she had over his life, but she couldn't, be a part of his life, which to her was a no-brainer from a professional standpoint, but had a lot of repercussions in this case.
Yeah, I think that you raised an interesting question of what would have happened if she had ruled in his favor and he didn't have the blood transfusion, but he had survived. I mean, obviously, if she had ruled in his favor and he didn't have the blood transfusion and he died, that would just be, I mean, we wouldn't know. He would just die. But if he survived, there would be a few ways that could go. I could see a situation where he survived with those permanent medical consequences, and then living with those consequences, then regretted his choice and feel like, I wish I had the procedure, or I wish someone had, tried to get me to have the procedure. But also, he might not have. He might have still felt the same way and still felt that was worth it.
Well, if he would have had the choice at any point in the future, especially as an adult, to accept a blood transfusion, in the future, he could have decided that.
Yeah, he could have. Although I think it's my understanding is that it's always kind of unknown if you treat leukemia whether it will come back.
Oh, okay.
That that the doctors might have thought, okay, we're going to do this treatment, do the blood transfusion, and then he'll basically be cured. And then he wasn't, which can happen. You can go through the treatment, and the leukemia can come back.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he could have had it like any number of things could have happened. Yeah, I really was uncomfortable with the way that she to him, when she visited him in the hospital and explained, well, not only could you die, but you could also go into kidney failure or go blind or something. And sort of almost framing those as like worse than dying, which is pretty insensitive to people who do have those disabilities. But that's a very common theme in I'm a little bit wandering. I'm sorry. It's a little bit of a theme in like messaging geared towards young people. Is it's kind of a truism that in education and in like safety messaging to young people, telling them about the risk of fatality isn't something you should bother doing. But if you tell them that they'll be injured or be disabled, they will think of that as a fate worse than death, which is interesting premise.
Well, I think it's interesting that he kind of, it was love at first sight, or whatever you want to call it, on his part when he met the judge.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pre-blood transfusion or any other treatment. So that stood alone as an event, and that even could have influenced his health. Sometimes when you have something to live for, or a goal in mind, in this case, he wanted to be in her life, and maybe that could have influenced his health. And I just think it was an interesting thought that, her response, was, of course we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that negatively affected his life. I mean, it's like, can exceptions ever be made, and things like that. So.
Right. And I'm not as familiar with the British legal system. But the way that it was laid out in the book, it definitely sounded like it was definitely portrayed that she could have ruled the other way. With him being 17 and a half, she could have ruled that he was old enough to make the choice.
Yeah.
She was exercising her power in saying, even though this is his choice, even though he's, he knows this, like she specifically said, he knows his own mind. It's not a matter of him not being able to give informed consent, but because he's not quite 18, we have this power to use on him.
Yes, and so that was the point of the visit, was for her to determine if he was of sound mind, and that was his decision, which it was, and also, his parents were not in the room, so he wasn't being influenced by them at that moment.
Right. And I mean, like on the one hand, obviously he was influenced by his parents, just in that, everyone is influenced by our parents and the way we grew up, and there is no neutral worldview. And it seemed like that there was a recurring theme, and I don't know if this came up in the movie version, because it's been a while since I've seen it, but there were some like minor subplots of other child welfare cases that she was ruling on involving religious minorities. And there was kind of that recurring theme of that religious minorities are outside the mainstream, and that the family court has a duty to, I don't remember exactly how it's worded, but that the family court has a duty to make decisions for children that are within the mainstream of society. Like there's a part where she's ruling on an Orthodox Jewish family, with divorced parents, and one parent wants to send the children to a very traditional Haredi Orthodox Jewish school, where it is very specifically a religious education, and the other parent wanted to send them to more of a secular school. And in the case, she ruled in favor of sending them to the secular school, using that same reasoning that the Haredi Orthodox Jewish way of life was outside the mainstream.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they definitely did cover those other cases in the movie, and I should watch the movie again. But if that was the theme, that these other cases were minorities, and in some cases maybe there is something objectionable to that, like mutilation of genitals or something like that. But in other cases, it might just be that they're a minority and others look down on that. And so did it cover how she ruled in those other cases? Did she rule against everyone who was a minority?
There was one there in the one case with the Orthodox Jewish family. She ruled in favor of the parent who wanted to send them to the more secular school. And then there was another, was a child custody case, where the mother was British and the father was Moroccan, and the father wanted to take the child to Morocco, and the mother wanted to raise the child in Britain, which is like, I mean, is the kind of child custody case that happens all the time with, international parents, immigrant parents. But she kept emphasizing in the text that the father was Muslim, and even reading it, I was like constantly referring back to his religion seems gratuitous, because that's not what the dispute is about.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, the geography, or the just so you know, I'm on camera. It's about like the geography and the like nationality. It just seemed really gratuitous to bring up,
Mm-hmm.
to repeatedly reference the fact that the father was Muslim. And I think that kind of made me, 3 makes a pattern of her seeming to have, I would say, some type of unexamined prejudice regarding religious minorities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if that, since that was in the book, I mean, obviously the writer put that in there for a reason, so that the reader could observe that the judge was following the pattern, and maybe not even being aware of her own biases, but just assuming that because I am a judge in Britain, that our way is superior.
Right. And I think that is something, I think that for me as an American reader, I grew up with the idea that the courts are supposed to be religiously neutral. I mean, whether or not that is actually true in practice is like a whole other debate. But like the idea that we are taught on paper is that the courts are not supposed to favor any religious group over another. But in the UK, it's a very different cultural context, because they actually do have a state religion, even though they have a lot of religious minorities.
Yes, and that is interesting, because these other groups and minorities and religions are a lot more prominent in Britain than they would be, say, for instance, in the United States, in most cases. And so that is a greater juxtaposition, and here we don't have a state religion. So maybe it could even be perceived as a threat somehow to a British judge or person. And maybe because in some cases they do things that are objectionable, like I mentioned. But I don't know. I think I'd have to go back and read her brief, and whatever the justification she gave for each one of the rulings, if it's there.
Yeah, that it was interesting. The part about the Orthodox Jewish family is like it didn't have any bearing on the larger plot. So the only reason that it was included in there, I think, was to give an insight into her as a character and the types of beliefs that she holds.
Yeah.
Because it's a very short novel. It's only 220 pages.
Yeah.
So, to have a small subplot in there that doesn't really have anything to do with the main plot, I think really, I think that was the purpose of that subplot, and also the subplot of the Moroccan Muslim family.
And wasn't there another case that she was deciding at that time. From what I remember, she had all these really life and death, or several life and death cases that she was ruling on at the same time that her husband was pressuring her to spend more time with him. And at the same time, she felt like these are just too important. Wasn't there another case where it was like a life and death situation?
Yes, it was conjoined twins who were going to die unless they were surgically separated. And she ruled that they should be separated, and one twin died and the other twin survived. Whereas if she had left them conjoined, according to the doctors, they would have both died. And so that is almost the classical ethical conundrum of, is it better to save one person if one person is going to die, and one person can be saved, but it means the other one is going to die. That's a very sort of almost classic ethical dilemma type of situations.
But it also was it the parents that didn't want that to happen.
Right. It was the parents who didn't want the twins separated because they knew that if they were separated, one of the twins would die.
I see.
And then the counter argument was, but if you don't, then they'll both die.
I see.
So, and then that was also, that also tied into the plot of her troubles with her husband, because she was so disturbed by that case that it was making her sort of withdrawn from her husband.
Yes. And his argument was, look, you shouldn't be allowing this to impinge so much on your personal life, because if you do, it's just going to keep happening. And you'll never have a personal life, which, could have been true. So I found his argument compelling.
Yeah. So she never told him that was, in the book, she never told him that the reason why she was going through this difficulty emotionally was because of the conjoined twins case. And so it was kind of like, how could she have said that, and also how could she have completely severed any emotional reaction when dealing with life and death cases. But also from his point of view, it's more like, well, that's just your job, it shouldn't affect your personal life.
Right. It's more like to the degree of it, because being in that position, you could have a case like that every month, or every week. And so, especially, if you're married, a balance is, should be there. But I mean, even if she wasn't married, she could have allowed that to take over her life, and not in a good way. So it was, that was a hard one. But at the same time, another person is involved they said, well, I'm being neglected. So, it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah. So I guess that gives us an opportunity to pivot to, did you have any thoughts about that subplot with her and her husband, and him, leaving her and coming back, and all of that whole subplot?
Well, I can understand him leaving in a way to make a point, but committing adultery is another, that's a whole nother level, which I don't think that necessarily justifies that.
Yeah, I didn't find that I just didn't find that very interesting compared to the main plot. One aspect that I did find interesting that seemed to be a thematic link, though, was his rationale for wanting to leave her for another woman. Was he said, because I'm 59 years old and I'm going to die, and there's probably no afterlife, so this life is all we have, so I'm going to, like, I'm paraphrasing, I'm going to maximize my life, or like live my life to its fullest, which means I'm going to go, leave you for another woman. And I thought that was a little bit interesting because of the thematic link, that there's an older man coming to the conclusion that, like, there's no afterlife, so just do whatever you want now, basically. Just follow your desires now, relative to a young man who is so far of the opposite end that he's willing to die, for his beliefs, and is fully convinced, of that afterlife, and like, if I die, it doesn't matter because my soul will live on. And so that was kind of the only part that was interesting to me, was kind of that thematic contrast of that profound philosophical difference of, is it this life that matters? Is it the afterlife that matters? Can it be both? How an individual feels about that question will determine the choices they make in life.
Yeah, I missed that part. Where he said that this life is all there is, and I have a right to do that. That's an interesting juxtaposition. That one person was willing to give up their life, at least temporarily, for their belief or their relationship with a higher power, and another person felt, because they don't have such a belief, that they're in a sort of desperate situation, that I have to go out and do this thing. And the other part about when he came back home, I don't think they really explored what happened to his relationship, his other relationship. It just ended, and he came home. So that was kind of, I don't know if he was just wanted to be with his wife or what. I don't think they explored that.
In the book, that basically that he went to his new girlfriend, and then after regretted his decision, and realized that he really loved his wife, not his new girlfriend. Which, that's actually also another thematic parallel with Adam, the young man, is that both of them, start off in this very, family oriented way, and then rebel against that, whether, Adam by leaving the church and leaving his parents, Jack by leaving his wife for another woman, but then in the end they kind of return back to their families. So it's almost like they went through a period of exploring elsewhere, but then in the end came back to what for them had been the constant of their lives.
So Adam returned to his family. I don't remember that from the movie.
Yeah, he in the movie he correctly in the movie he did not return to his family.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, in the book he did. He returned to his family and he returned to the church.
I see.
So there is a little bit of a parallel of leaving one's family and coming back.
Okay, because in the movie, Adam refused all treatment and then died. But if in the book he returned to his family, the Jehovah's Witnesses don't spurn any and all treatment, just blood transfusions. So did it say that he accepted other treatments but died nevertheless?
It didn't say just that he was refusing blood transfusion and
that might have been that might have been a good thing for the author to explore, because it may leave some people with the impression that Jehovah's Witnesses reject all forms of medical treatment, which is not true. And that's how people get it confused with Christian Scientists and things like that.
Right. Yeah. And it was laid out not in the end, but in the beginning part in the book, in the trial part, where the lawyers did say he's not objecting to any treatment other than the blood transfusion.
Okay.
Which it almost seemed to me like legally, which again, the British legal system is completely different, and I'm thinking of it from an American lens, but it seemed to me almost like the religious reasoning would be a separate issue. Like the issue is whether he should have the right to make a choice, regardless of whether the reason for his choice is because of his religion or because, like any reason that someone might have for refusing a recommended medical treatment, whether it be their religion or they're concerned about side effects or like whatever the case may be, that legally the issue would be the individual's right to choose, not so much their reasoning behind their choice.
Right. And that was made, that point was brought up recently with vaccinations, that any belief that the person has is a religious exemption. It doesn't have to be tied to a specific religious belief or church.
Right. That like it regardless of what the reason is, that it's the patient's right to choose.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a completely different legal context, so I don't necessarily want to say something I don't really know about as far as the British legal system, but I did find that interesting. And there were some other objections brought out, like in addition to the religious objection. The lawyer said, blood transfusion can have side effects. There can be bloodborne illnesses. There can be, and it like there might be all kinds of reasons why someone might choose to forego treatment, even just as basic as someone who has a terminal illness might just feel like like they're ready to go, that they don't necessarily want their life saved.
Right. And with blood transfusions, I mean, it depends on what kind of tests are given on the donated blood. For instance, they don't test for cancer. So different things can be transmitted in the blood. They don't test for everything. So, there's always, I think maybe one point of the author might be that nothing is ever black and white.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I actually went down a little bit of reading about some of the histories of blood transfusions and of bloodless surgery, which it was interesting to me that bloodless surgery, which is doing surgery in a way to minimize blood loss to the patient, was originally developed as a way to accommodate Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's also just in many cases a healthier way to do surgery. All else being equal, doctors don't want patients to bleed out. So something that was invented for a religious purpose also turned out to be useful as a secular purpose.
Yes, because the main reason is for the volume of the blood and I believe the oxygen carrying capacities, which can be done with some of the other things that they've developed, and could even, of course, be safer since it wouldn't have those hidden possibilities of other diseases in the blood.
Right. And with any medical treatment, like you said, there's always risks and benefits. So it's like legally it just comes down to whether the governing authority, whether the judge or the government or whatever governing authority recognizes the individual's right to choose, or whether they decide that the individual should not have that right for whatever reason.
Right.
And it definitely seemed like, in the way that it was presented in the book, it was like it almost didn't matter that he was 17 and a half versus 18. It was like it didn't really seem like his wishes as the person whose body it was were being taken into account.
Right. And then with the and so she kind of ruled against her husband too by not acceding to his wishes, even though from what I remember, it was that particular weekend she had all these cases she had to focus on. But at the same time, he was saying, look, you haven't spent any time with me in X number of weekends. And it was at that critical point. So it was almost as though she was ruling against her husband too. But in this case, being married, she actually had some obligation to take into consideration his wishes. That's how I saw it.
Yeah, that is in the book. It seemed like her husband even really asking to spend time with her. I mean, I think maybe it was implied that they'd had that conversation a few times, but in the text of the story, he's just like he doesn't even say, I want to spend more time with you. He just says, I'm leaving you for another woman. So it almost seems like he didn't give her a chance, but at the same time, he wanted to do what he wanted to do. He wasn't concerned about his obligations to his wife. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. So
yeah, the impression I was getting, this is mainly from the movie, is that she had turned him down like one too many times. And the justification for that was the severity of the cases.
Right.
Which he's not going to look at that. He's not going to look at the severity of the cases. He's like, look, you have cases all the time. So I could look at it from the viewpoint that they were expressing in the movie, but not to the point of committing adultery. I don't think that's justified, because that could just end your marriage. So.
Right. Right. And he even asks her, like, well, I think he kind of tries to start by saying, I want to have a relationship with this other woman, but I'm letting you know. And then she, says that she's not okay with that. And so he just decides that then he's leaving. So they don't even, and then even when he comes back, they don't really ever talk about it. They don't ever seem to like communicate with each other very much.
Right. I noticed that, he came in and she said that's the end of the affair, and he says it would seem so. That was about it. So, on the other hand, maybe that would have caused damage to have a detailed discussion.
I can understand. Yeah, I can understand that too. But there was also a lot about like during the time that he was away living with his other girlfriend, she was thinking about the situation, and there was a lot of emphasis that it wasn't so much that she, missed him or loved him, but she didn't want the social consequences of like a scandalous divorce.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that also kind of fed into her characterization as someone who is very, image conscious, focused on, how it would look, what society would think, more even than what she wanted.
Mm-hmm. And also, when he was gone, then, and this boy was, Adam was approaching her, she also didn't have someone to process that with.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was on her own. So that was interesting. She really didn't have someone to talk to about it.
Right. And she, she was kind of, dismissive of him. I felt like she didn't really understand or even really try to understand what he was going through, because from his point of view, when he's writing to her and coming to see her, which, could border on stalking. I'm not making excuses for that. But from his point of view, it's like you made a decision for my life against my will that turned my life upside down. And then you get to walk away and go back to your life. And I'm the one living with the consequences. So from that perspective, I'm sympathetic to why he was, demanding something from her. Like, okay, you've ruined my relationship with my family. So, are you going to be my new family? Are you going to show me another way of life after you took me away from my way of life?
Right. It's like her obligation ended right there in her mind, and to him, it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was another very minor plot that, because I was just thinking that theme of, as a judge, she has the authority to make decisions that profoundly affect people's lives, for good or ill. She has the power. And then at the end of the day, she just goes home and lives her life. And she does not deal with the fallout or the consequences of the rulings that she imposes on others.
Right. And she also doesn't have all that much power in her personal life.
Right. Right.
So that's a juxtaposition. Yeah, she does her job and she goes home and she maybe doesn't even follow up on what happened in those cases.
Right. There was a part near the beginning where she was kind of condemning one of her colleagues, another judge. I don't remember if this was in the movie, but it was in the book, that this other judge had convicted a mother of murdering her children. And it was a wrongful conviction. The mother was innocent. It turned out forensic evidence proved that the children had died of natural causes. So this judge, because he didn't look closely enough at the forensic evidence, he had given out this ruling that had sent an innocent person to prison for a crime she didn't commit. And that is a very real and it's a powerful story because we know that it is real. We know that there are innocent people who go to prison for crimes they didn't commit, maybe because they didn't have a good lawyer, or the police messed up, or any number of things can go wrong that lead to that outcome. What stuck out to me in this book passage is that when Fiona, the protagonist, is saying, or thinking in her head, this other judge really should have known better. He should have looked at the forensic evidence. He shouldn't have just assumed that this woman was guilty, because really it would be incredibly unlikely that a middle-class woman would murder her children. And reading that, I put the book down and I was like, what? That is not, you can't just replace one bias with another. There are plenty of middle-class people who commit murder. There are plenty of poor people who don't commit murder. Most poor people don't commit murder. I mean, you're just reifying this class prejudice in the context of deriding judicial bias. And I was very curious, for the author, for Ian McEwan to put that in there, I was like, is that what he believes? Does he believe that only poor people commit murders? Or is he putting that in the mouth of the protagonist in order to criticize it, or to highlight her bias, to make her seem less sympathetic to the reader? Is the reader supposed to react the way I did and object to that bias, or was something else intended with that, aside?
Yeah, why was it there? It's interesting because I did send a link to the book discussion to the author. The author has a website and an invitation. So that would have been interesting. But I mean, he could always go back and listen to it.
Sure. I mean, I would be very curious, because that was the one part where I was like, what, is this the author saying this? Is this the author putting this point of view in the mouth of a character, to criticize it? But yeah. That I definitely was taken aback by that. And there was another part near the end, where there was another lawyer talking about some people who had been wrongfully convicted. And in their case, they were wrongfully convicted because the prosecutor wrongfully assumed that they were Irish travelers. And in that context, it seemed like the the perspective of the story as well as the perspective of the characters was like, and that's wrong, and the prosecutor should not have assumed that, should not have been prejudiced against presumed Irish travelers, which, as prejudice against Irish travelers is a big problem in the UK. And so it's almost like, well, in the one context, at least the protagonist point of view is like criticizing that bias of assuming that someone is guilty just because they are of a marginalized demographic, but also saying like, oh, a middle class person wouldn't be a murderer.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it seems like maybe there's a confluence of evidence that the writer was saying something about the British legal system that is, because it's been in effect for so long, and the country is older and so on and so forth, that there would be more of a tendency to be biased towards that, and as well as having more extreme immigrant religious communities than we usually see here. I mean, we have that, but not to the extent that they are in Britain, because you have more refugees, or it's easier to get there from other countries, and so they have larger communities and so forth. So it seems like there is more of a juxtaposition there, and that may have carried over to in her decision against Adam.
Right, and that gets back to the thing we were talking about earlier, where Britain has a lot of religious minorities, but does have a state religion, so they don't have the underlying assumption that the U.S. legal system, at least theoretically, has about the government being religiously neutral. So yeah, those were the things that kind of jumped out at me in the story. And then the ending, the fact that after everything, that Adam refused treatment and died, it kind of, it made me wonder, like, so what is the takeaway of that story? That he was 18, he had the choice, and he said, yes, this is my choice. I am choosing to forego the doctor's recommended medical treatment, even if it results in my death. And it did result in his death. But Fiona was obviously, she felt guilty about that. She felt like if she had reached out to him more, he would have made a different choice.
Right, because he was rejecting, like we said, all medical treatment. There's other treatments, for leukemia. I don't know, but
well, I mean, a blood disease is a cancer of the blood. I'm not an expert in it. I have known people who've had it. My understanding is that its treatment generally involves blood transfusion.
Okay, so that's maybe why the author chose that disease. But still, I mean, there are natural treatments for cancer and so on and so forth. I mean, that I'm sure, he could have explored, but at the same time, like you say, that was the main treatment. So my takeaway from the book, because I always ask myself, why did they write the book? What was their point? And so my point was that he was rejected by Fiona, and so he chose to die, essentially, to go that path.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was the way that she framed it, I thought. But I was thinking, is that what she is telling herself? Because like she obviously has a very strong bias about which choice is the correct one. And so she's kind of thinking, well, like if I had influenced him more, he would have made the correct choice. But maybe, it would have been, that was his choice. That was always going to be the choice that he wanted to make, regardless of anyone else's influence. And it was kind of left open-ended.
Mm-hmm. So like you say, that's interesting that you say the right choice, because is it the right choice, or is it the freedom to make a choice that is the most important thing?
Right. I mean, like, to me, the way that I see the world, I think it's the freedom to make the choice that's the most important thing. Obviously, that's not the way that Fiona sees it. She clearly thinks, well, there is a right choice. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of left ambiguous. I think, like, whether her influence could have changed his mind, or would even if her influence had changed his mind, would he be happy in the long run?
Right. I don't, it's like, I don't think she could have competed with his carefully held beliefs.
Right.
And so,
right. That was what he believed. He even said that, like, he was sick to his stomach at the thought of having someone else's blood in his body. Because because that's what he believes, is that there's something wrong with that. And he's not going to change that. I mean, he might choose to change that, but it's not going to be changed for him.
So it was like a violation,
right,
for him.
Right.
And at the same time, he did have a crush on her. That didn't change. Mm-hmm. And he did want to pursue that. So that was like a double, like you said, a double whammy. First, his beliefs are violated, and then she declines to be in his life.
Right. And after he left his parents and left the church, he was basically, alone in the world. Because as I understand it, in many places, Jehovah's Witnesses tend to be a community that primarily, like, that the church is their primary social support. So for someone to have been raised in that community and then lose that is like losing everything.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so he lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they weren't rejecting him for the fact that a blood transfusion was forced upon him. They showed that he was still at home and, saying, are you going to go to the meeting? So, but it was his choice to walk away from it. Right. And everything. Yeah.
Right. He chose to walk away, because I think because he was questioning that, belief of, like, you taught me that this medical procedure was wrong. Now I've had it done to me that I didn't want, so now what? Now this thing that I believe is wrong has been forced on me. So how am I supposed to move on with my life after that? That was how I interpreted how he was feeling. And I had a lot of empathy for him because I remember being 17 and a half and being like so close to 18 because it was like, you can't vote, you can't sign a contract, you can't, and it's so close on the horizon. The whole, so I vividly remember like being 17 and being like, I'm almost free, but just not quite. And I grew up with loving parents, so it wasn't like, needing to be free from my parents, which obviously a lot of kids deal with, but just needing to be free in general,
Yeah, not being able to. I remember being, almost 18 and just not being able to get a job.
Right. Just being like so close and yet so far from being able to take charge of your life and like really start living your life on your own terms. So I had an extreme degree of empathy for him on that basis. I think, have you read any other Ian McEwan books? And if so, how does this compare to them?
No, have you?
Yes, I read Atonement and The Nutshell, and I wanted to say one more. I got to look up which books are his. Looking at a list online, the titles are not reminding me which ones I've read. But yeah, the ones that I've read, they're all kind of like, it's not, the endings are ambiguous. It's not, there's not clearly like a resolution or like the moral of the story. It's just kind of, well, this happened. So yeah.
So he must be like a teacher or professor too, because that's what teachers or professors do. They want to open it up for discussion and find out what it means to each reader. And there's enough leeway that can happen.
Right. And so I kind of think it was like, it was like, it's like, what are we supposed to take away with it from this? I don't know.
My takeaway was that it was about love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that definitely was a theme. Yeah, definitely, like Adam was searching for love, from Fiona or from his community or from, maybe from himself. I don't know.
Well, maybe another theme could be that it's easy to look at something on paper and make a decision, but that there are always unintended consequences or side effects or whatever you want to call it. Like real life is a lot different from something, a judicial decision that you're reading on paper.
Right. And to look at someone else's life and decide, well, this is what they should do, when no one can know the other person's, reasons for their choices or what may be motivating them or what is right for them.
Right, like that the Bible says, judge not lest ye be judged.
Mm-hmm.
We can't really judge other people. We can make our own decisions. We might even have opinions on what they do, but in the end, we're not the judge.
Right. Like in the end, you can't live someone else's life for them, and that's, maybe the takeaway is that that's a dangerous amount of power to wield over another person.
And maybe another point he was making is that she had all this judicial power over these other families, but her own life was kind of falling apart. And it's like, so what does that say? You know?
Right, right. Well, I think we probably need to wrap this up, if only because my battery is dying.
Okay, and you know, at the Rec Talk, if you want to discuss some of his other books, then I might be interested in reading another one, especially since they're so short.
Yeah, they're short. All
And
right,
were
yeah.
any others made into movies? Or
I know that Atonement was made into a movie.
okay, yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah, maybe you could talk about a few of those. And
I should probably disclaim just for sensitivity purposes, Atonement does involve child rape. It involves a teenage girl being raped.
Okay, well, maybe something less dramatic, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I can mention it at recommendation group, but I always try to mention if there's something disturbing in it, just so people can be aware.
Yeah, maybe something less disturbing. Maybe you could talk about another one of his books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be interesting, and I think if we wanted to set aside some time at recommendation group to talk about the book for anybody who read the book but couldn't make the Google Meets, because obviously we know that this week's scheduling was kind of messed up with
Yeah, I mean, I was
and
worried
whatnot.
that the library was closed, but then when I realized I had to pick up a lot of debris in my yard, then I realized that, you know, some places didn't have power, so and all that. So
Yeah,
that might have prevented people from coming anyway, like if they
right.
didn't have power or something. Yeah.
Right, and I think probably some people evacuated, or it's been a rough week. But yeah, I think we should talk about that, and you know, and maybe some other books that we can discuss. I know that I talked about the Children Act with a couple of other people who for various reasons couldn't Google Meets in, but it's definitely a really interesting story, and so thank you for recommending it. I think it was definitely a really interesting pick for book club,
Yeah,
even if it's a book club of two. So you know,
right. I'm glad people liked it, and like you said, maybe we'll still have a chance to discuss it next Thursday. A little bit.
All right. I will see you then. I am signing off. I do have the video of this. So, you know, we have the video, and like you said, people can view it later.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Okay, bye-bye.